Welcome to Show Me Sports Legacies. I'm Jeff Curley, your host, and I'm here tonight with Chris Hockenfels, my co-host, as always, holding down the other side of this table. And we got some stuff to talk about or celebrate, I think. Sad.
Yeah, where did you pick up these horns, Jeff?
The horn budget was very low.
We hit a milestone for the podcast, which, as some of our listeners know, that we are now starting our third calendar year, and first season 1 was in 2024, and season 2 covered 2025, and now we've ventured into 2026. And in, I believe, the last episode of 2025, we hit a number for our downloads of our podcast, and you can reveal what number that is.
That number is 5,000 downloads of our podcast since our beginning in July of 24.
So congratulations, Jeff. You get all the kudos because of all the time and effort and work you put into this and the studio and to make it happen. I'm just glad to be here and be able to spread some sports cheer out there in Northwest Missouri and do what we can do to spread some legacies around and have people hear some of the stories that are just out there ready to be told.
Now, you brought me a little gift for the studio here.
I did. To initiate our new season, I brought you a baseball card. I love baseball cards and I'm a collector. And in our last episode, Chad Boyd had nominated Nathan Lucas, the player for the Blue Jays who ended up in the World Series against the Dodgers. And Nathan Lucas had played as a Chillicothe Mudcat and when he was coming up through his professional baseball career. And that was one of the stories of the year from Chad. So I found a rookie card of him and brought it in so it can be part of our memorabilia for the studio.
Excellent. Excellent. We need some Chillicothe Mudcat stuff in here. We don't have any of their banners. Maybe this summer we can pick up one of those. The bobblehead room's getting a little tight. The banner room's getting a little tight, but there's always room for more. Tonight we're going to talk about something that kind of surrounds us. It's the Grand River Conference, and the Grand River Conference is going on 96 years in various forms. Mm-hmm. So in 1929, seems like that was a bad year to start a lot of things, but it was a tough year for the country. But a conference was formed in Northwest Missouri to cut down on travel expenses and create championship opportunities for North Missouri athletes. First members paid a whopping entry fee of $2.
And back then you could use a $2 bill and you'd have it covered.
So administrators, you've worked with administrators as a coach, you've been a sports administrator, tight with the budget at all times, $2. And the first games began in 1930. So now the conference, which is split into the GRC and the GRC West configurations, and we'll talk more about that with 8-man football dominating on the west side and 11-man football still prevalent on the east side. And in that first conference game, Maysville played Bethany in the first title game, with Bethany winning on a late rally. In case you're wondering, the score is just in 1930. Our guest tonight in the SMSL studio is Jeremy Benson. He is a St. Joseph resident who is a financial planner, a local pastor in the area, and a website administrator, social media coordinator, content creator for the Grand River Conference. Jeremy maintains the GrandRiverConference.com website, Twitter, I refuse to call it X, Facebook, and Instagram accounts. Jeremy, welcome to Show Me Sports Legacies.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, my first question is, with that portfolio, what do you do in your spare time?
What I do in my spare time? Probably just play a few games on the phone. I do spend some time with my grandkids, but I do spend a lot of time on these 3 jobs, basically.
Absolutely. He does something that you'd be interested in, and I think you told me about it, actually.
Oh, right. So as I was going through the GRC social media, which I like to check every day because it's a great way to get GRC scores and updates, notice that 2 GRC schools played in the Indiana Hoosiers gym. It's called the Hoosier Gym, and it's, if you know the movie Hoosiers, it's the gym where Hickory played their home games, and you can play there. And popped up one day that the GRCs headed to the Hoosier Gym and played a game there between, I believe, Stewartsville and Maysville.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that trip. Jeremy, I know you went and logged the trip on social media and had updates. So how was that?
It was one of the greatest experiences of my lifetime. I've always been a big fan of Hoosiers. It's my favorite sports movie. Every time I watch it, I cry. It's really only one of 2 movies I've ever done that with. So I watched it again the week before. But so just walking into that gym and just seeing the scenes that were in the movie, Just felt like I was going back in time. It was so surreal. It was very emotional and maybe shed a few tears as I walked in there, and especially as I started playing music from the movie in the gym, it just gave me goosebumps. But it was a really neat experience. I'd recommend anyone who has a chance to do that in the future to do it, especially if you're a basketball fan, if you're a fan of the movie Hoosiers. But it was just an awesome experience.
And for basketball fans who know that movie, love it because it just brings back those memories of when you were a kid out in the driveway shooting baskets and hoping one day you'd make it on the team, and maybe the small town team would have a chance against the big city teams. And it looks like they've kept that gym exactly the same as it was in the movie. They've done a great job of maintaining that, so when you go in there, it feels like you're in the movie.
Yeah, everything except probably backboards. The court is a little bit different because they changed the court for the movie so they could have sidelines, but it's actually too wide to have the seats on the sidelines, so you actually sit at the ends in the games. And the scoreboard is new. They don't have they still have the old scoreboard up there, but it has the score of the championship game 42-40 permanently on that scoreboard.
Oh, very nice. Did fans from Maysville and Stewartsville make the trip?
Yes, there was probably, including the players, there was probably about 300 people there in the gym. It was loud. It was exciting. Both fan bases, and they both had student sections there as well. They were really great for the experience. It was something that both towns really embraced.
It seems kind of silly logistically to think, well, these two schools that are 15, 20 minutes apart, right, would go all the way to Indiana and play. But what an experience for those kids.
It's sports.
And coaches.
We'll go anywhere
right,
for sports.
Those kids and coaches to get that moment to play in that gym in front of their fans. They'll never forget that. That's a really, really cool story.
Excellent. I want to talk about how this all came about.
Sure.
What possessed you to start this? I know I've been asked that question about a podcast. Where do you do it? I built a studio. How'd you do that? Well, I got on eBay. I got on all these places, and I just started. Eventually developed minimal competence so that we could launch this program. So talk to me about why you took this on and what drove you to do it. What's in you that made you need to do this?
So I've always been a fan of high school sports in the state of Missouri. I grew up in Monroe City, Missouri, on the other side of the state. And, we had very successful sports when I was in school. I was able to go to the state basketball several times, got to experience that. But I really was not an athlete myself. I played in junior high basketball. Other than table tennis, I wasn't great at any sports. And, I was fairly good at that, but not great. But
we could test that. Just beneath the studio is a ping pong table.
So when I got to college, I kept following it a little bit. I'd go to some games, and then I got a job. I went through the actuarial exams for my job, and that took a lot of time. So I kind of got away from it a little bit. And once I was done with that, my kids were older. My daughter was a cheerleader at St. Joe Christian. And so St. Joe Christian joined the conference in 2016. And one of the things that they had is where they had two divisions at that time, but they were going to play crossover games at the end of the year. So I started keeping scores of games just to track for myself, who was going to be playing in some of these games. I also wanted to track some of the football scores as well. And I started posting them on Twitter, and I don't call it X either. So I started posting it on Twitter, and people would be tagging me and started to call me the GRC guy because I was posting everything GRC on my Twitter page. So I thought I already had a website that I had designed, and I thought I should build a website for this. And that was back in the 2016-2017 season. And so I built the website, and really everything has snowballed from there. I eventually created the Grand River Conference Twitter account. Then I created a Facebook page for the Grand River Conference, created an Instagram, even have one on Threads, but nobody goes to there. And
only good news.
Yeah. And so I basically started doing this, and then I thought one day, I've had a blog and other things, and so I just started a blog. When I started the blog, it was more just kind of blogging about games, but then I started doing different things on the blog. I've written a few stories on there. I basically do a power poll for all of the schools. I did some preseason previews on there. And then what the blog enabled me to do is to really start expanding to other sports. So I was following the team sports, but it was very hard to do things like wrestling and golf. And because I couldn't go get all of the results, just to get that would have been way too much time. And there are sites out there to do that. But I started writing stories about conference and districts and things like that, state when they went to state. And so the blog kind of expanded in doing some of those things. Then I did a podcast, which I'm not doing right now. I did that for a few years. And then I started doing photography. My friend Clifton Grooms had started doing photography, and he gave me a lot of pointers on this. And so I started taking pictures, and that part I really loved. And so I said, okay, if I'm going to have time to do that, I can't really do the podcast. So it's really kind of evolved from that. It was just really, I wanted to keep track of the scores, and it evolved from that to what it is today.
I think it's interesting, and media is so diverse from what it was even back 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The concept that you can take your interest and there's enough information out there that you can pull that together and then become a resource that people go to, I think is cool. And you kind of create your own path.
Right.
Here we do the podcast and we laugh because a lot of our stuff is legacy oriented, of course. And so it's pre-internet, and people that want to listen to it don't really know how to use their phones to get to a podcast sometimes. And we have to literally walk them through the fact that it's available at any time, as your websites, as your Twitter account can be accessed at any point. And there've been a lot of nights, I don't know about you, Chris, but a lot of nights where I go, I wonder who won that ball game in the GRC. And I go looking for your Twitter account because it's what tells me before anybody else really what happened, who won that game.
Right. And sometimes it's really difficult, you would think, with all the information flowing on Twitter and Facebook, to find a score. I mean, sometimes you're like, oh, come on, really? There's got to be a score out there somewhere. And sometimes I even see you like, who's got the score? Like, finally, you have to just ask people, because there'll be somebody out there that has a score. Sometimes it takes a while for schools. They're supposed to post their scores relatively quickly on Misha after the game. Sometimes it's not till the next day that they do that. So you're kind of searching for that score. And it is such a convenience to be able to go to one site, and we'll talk about this a little more later, but to go to one site, one source to find all of these scores. And I know a lot of people use that as their primary source for scores, especially in this area. You've gotten to a point now where your site and your Twitter and Facebook are the number one source for scores in the area, and that's got to feel pretty good.
It's kind of crazy. I never thought it would get to this place, but it is really interesting to know that what I'm doing impacts so many people.
Let me go back a little bit, if you don't mind, to 2015, because when you're talking about that all starting up, it brought back memories from me, because I was the athletic director at Trenton at that time, and we were conference searching. Actually, we go way back to when I first got here. We had just gotten out of the MEC. And this is odd because our conference search and all of this shuffle kind of went right with the conference shuffle that happened in the NCAAs about that time. The Big Ten and the SEC, those mega conferences were starting to shuffle, starting to change, invite out, invite in. The Big 12 lost a bunch of teams, gained a bunch of teams. And we were kind of doing that too on the high school level. And the season that St. Joe Christian, you mentioned that started, was the season that Trenton came in. All is part of that big change in the GRC. It's been kind of stable for years. I know Penny, which is Hamilton, jumped out and went to KCHI, and Trenton comes along, and now we've got this mega conference with two divisions. What were your thoughts on that when all of that all of a sudden changed? Did you think part of that was, now here's my opportunity, now there's 16 teams instead of 10 or whatever it was, this thing's going to grow and I can grow with it?
I really didn't give that a thought because I couldn't envision what I would be doing. Now, I feel like all of this is just something that came to me. I was very interested in high school sports, and especially since my kids were at St. Joe Christian and at the time, and knew they were going to join this conference. So that's really when I started just following the GRC. I didn't really know a lot about the GRC at the time. I followed mostly what St. Joe Christian was doing. I'd follow what my alma mater, Monroe City, was doing. My wife was from Stewartsville. I'd follow them. And so I'd follow some of those schools, but I really wasn't following everything that was involved in the GRC. So I started the next year. I thought, well, this is very interesting. They're going to be in this conference. It's a mega conference, 16 teams. And I just thought it'd be interesting. So I knew I wanted to start following. I was going to ball games anyway because my daughter was a cheerleader. And I said, I might as well just do this. So it really wasn't something I sat down and thought, oh, I want to be the person doing all this GRC stuff. I want to get involved in social media and podcasts and websites and photography. It really wasn't like that. It's just more of a gradual movement.
So what are the things that What platforms get you the most engagement? I mean, one of the things we've talked about in the podcast, we get a lot of individual feedback, but we haven't really connected in the social media world where people give us story ideas and those kind of things. What platform, what things get the most engagement or get the most interest, eyeballs, plus maybe people chiming in?
It's Facebook. It's Facebook, and it's not even close. Now, Instagram, I get some of the younger kids in there. I'm not that great at Instagram, so I probably could be doing better. But Facebook right now, I get about 1 million views a month on there. So it's by far the best. Now, the most successful posts usually might have about 10,000, 20,000 views. I've had one post go viral in the last 5-6 years, and it was when I took a picture of the Tolson brother and sister, Kiefer and Ainsley. They had a picture that basically said they were school record holders for basketball, and I took a picture of that, and that had over 600,000 views.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's my most successful post to date.
That was when Kiefer got the record for boys, he joined his sister, and now they both own those records for Trenton as the highest scoring boy and girl and their brother sister.
Right.
Yeah.
And it just happened that I was at NCMC. They had a picture taken. I said, "Can I take your picture and post this on the Facebook page?" And they said yes, and it blew up.
Yeah. It's just none of this stuff is predictable. No. Now, I will say that of all of our episodes, Ainsley Tolson's episode is the most popular. So there's something about Ainsley Tolson being the thread of success in the social media engagement world, I would suggest. But that's because she has so many friends and has traveled all over the Midwest playing basketball, and people have literally put their eyeballs on her watching her play. So is there anything, we talk about the internet, people are out of control with their opinions and all this kind of stuff. I mean, is there any sort of darkness that enters into your exchange every now and then, where people just get a little bent out of shape about something or?
Yes, that happens. Most of it has happened around when I've done end of the year awards type. I started those a couple of years ago. I had one parent who was not happy I put his kid on the third team. I had another parent who was not happy I didn't put the kid on any of the teams. And I had another one that told me that I was not covering their school, a school that I'd probably been to at least 10 times in the past 3 or 4 years before that, but told me I was not giving the coverage to them and I was playing favorites in the conference. So I've had a few of them.
No good deed goes unpunished, as
no,
they say.
No, it's not.
A couple of coaches here. We've all had parents withdraw, like not bring their kid to practice because they didn't play him enough or something like that was going to help him play.
Yeah. What's funny is that although I've gotten things on personal and teams, I've been doing the power rankings for a couple years now, and I have not gotten any responses. Now that I say that, I'll probably get one. But no one has disagreed with me, or at least they haven't disagreed publicly with me on that. So, but I put some time into making sure I look at all the scores. I look at what's happened last week versus what's happened through the season, and I try to be as objective as I can in those rankings.
It's always best.
Hey, couple burning questions I've got for you for conference.
Okay.
One, has the actual conference and conference chair or conference liaison ever approached you like, let's make this official, you're the official social media of the conference, or has this always been independent of the actual conference?
It's independent. They did approach me at one time asking if I want to get a stipend from them for this. And my thought was that I could probably make more money in sponsorships than the stipend they would give me. So it's never been an official, but I've worked very well with all of the conference members. Now it's 2 different conferences, but I've worked very well with them. One of the things I do is I want to make sure I don't do anything that it would put a bad light on the conference. And so I'm very cognizant of that, all the time, and making sure that if there's something I have a concern about, I will go to them and talk to them about it.
Very nice. Number 2 is, what do you think about the split? Now, we've gone full circle with this and brought everybody together for the mega conference, tried the crossovers, got to a point where it got too big and too many teams had different agendas with football and scheduling, and to split it now. But then the names, however that worked out, still remained GRC. Thoughts on how all that went down in the last year or so?
I know there were some schools, and especially on the west side, that were concerned that they were just getting dominated in sports. There was also some travel concerns. There were concerns during the basketball showcase that teams were playing a team that they just played 2 or 3 days before, and they didn't have control over that schedule. Of course, tournaments will do that too. You can face the same team 2 weeks in a row if you go in a tournament in regular season. But there was a lot of concerns around logistics. There were schools, I think, that were traditional schools thinking we don't have a shot to win conference like we used to. Instead of, beating 8 teams, you got to beat 15 teams to win a conference title. And so it really started from the West. The West was unanimous in splitting. The East was split in splitting. It was a 4-4 vote at the time. And then Princeton, of course, moved over to the West from that, and Marceline and Brookfield joined later. But it was something where I think they both felt that their schools, like the smallest schools and the largest schools, just had too much of a gap, and they wanted to make sure that they were really in their like schools for that. I was very disappointed at the time it did that, because one of my favorite days of the year was the basketball showcase. I loved that. I loved going to the games. I would get there probably about 8 o'clock in the morning before the first game started at 9. I would stay both days. I would be going back and forth to the gyms. And I loved that day. It was just something that's great. But after a while, it's kind of like it still has a lot of appeal where it is right now. Now we can crown 2 champions for every sport, which gets a lot more exposure. I separate them in a lot of the things I do, but it still feels like they're together somehow. I would love to have them put together some all-star games where they have the GRC versus GRC West and do something like that. I think that would be great. I think it needs a little bit of time because there's still some tensions there with the 2 conferences.
And I think the name, I think the GRC West, what it feels like from the outside, is wanted to hold on to a little piece of the GRC because you've got some original members over there.
Right.
So they kept the name to keep a little bit of that history, keep a little bit of that. Albany's been a member forever, I think was an original member, and Worth County's been a member for a long time. And Princeton and those schools wanted to keep a little bit of that history. And on the east side, now you've got a lot of these bigger schools who maybe have only been in the GRC for maybe 9 or 10 years now. So yeah, interesting that the names, even though they're officially a split conference now, they still carry the name and maybe a little connection to each other still for the future. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of people still, when they're talking about the GRC West, especially in 8-man football, because they're not competing with the GRC, there's some that will just call them the GRC. There's some that just call the GRC in different sports and say it's a GRC member. It's a lot easier just to say it's all GRC. It's 2 different conferences, but it's all GRC.
Yeah, very cool.
I'm with you on that. That was my favorite day of the year, the crossover games. The T-shirts and the kids' involvement, it reminded me of Holiday Hoops here.
Right.
It had that kind of feel like you're part of something bigger than you, and it's just kind of cool. And like you say, some of the games Stanberry and us got matched up multiple times, back-to-back. That wasn't great. But the whole event, especially when King City had their new gym and all that kind of stuff, it just seemed like it was the place to be. It was just had a lot of energy. So I like that, but I do understand the long-term goals are better served, maybe the way it's set up now. Competitively, some of this seems to be working out. I mean, we had a finalist from the East part of the conference in a state championship, and we had a state champion from the West side on the 8-man side this year. So it doesn't seem to have hurt GRC profile in the major sport.
No, it hasn't. And then softball, you had 3 teams go, 2 from the GRC, South Harrison and Gallatin, and 1 from Princeton go. This is a conference that has been very good in both wrestling and track and field. Multiple state champions in both, especially wrestling. Last year had 11 state champions. And so you get a lot of players. Golf has been very successful. There's just a lot of success in this conference, and every sport has multiple Final Four participants and multiple champions all the time. I think last count, there's been 54 state champions from the conference over its history, which would compete with most small school conferences around the state.
And I think it's great because as I was looking at your history profiles that you put out on your website, every school kind of found their niche, some sport that they uniquely were good at. Maybe Maysville in girls softball recently. That success has been huge. Somebody else in wrestling, somebody else in track and field being dominant. 8-man football, 11-man football. There's just a lot of places there, and almost every school has some banner they can wave of something they accomplished great back in the past or are accomplishing now in the sport that they invest a lot of resources and energy in. I mean, Gallatin and golf, amazing story, 6 and 20 years. Worth County's won 9 state titles in 8-man football. I mean, that's crazy. And even some of those original members kind of have their niche. It makes it competitive. So I appreciate that. I think there was a feeling when Trenton first got in because of size that somehow we would dominate. And it kind of happened that we had the best girls team we ever had for about a 4-year period there. Then that went away. And
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people thought the same thing. I mean, two things have happened. One is now Trenton is really in a lot of schools that, while they're still the biggest, are a lot closer to their size and geographically located. But there's just, you have times
cycles.
where you have cycles of where you have really good athletes and you're going to dominate, and then it won't be any good. I mean, I've seen that with many of these schools. St. Joe Christian, they had a really good girls team, and the whole senior class graduated that was on the team, and they're rebuilding again. You find that has happened with Trenton. You find that's happened with Milan right now. Milan, they were really good in a lot of sports, and their girls team is good this year, but they're really struggling in basketball. They struggled in football. But it will go in cycles. And what's really interesting is you see some of these schools come up that didn't have the success, and after a while you see some others replace them. So there's not really a dominant school just in all sports and anything. So it gives an opportunity for every school to have something where they can succeed at.
And that really makes for a great conference too,
Right.
is when you can pop up when you have a good team and have a chance to win the conference and make some noise and go into the postseason. And you really feel like every year when you're a coach and you're talking about to your players about, we can win a conference title this year, it's wide open. That's really, really good for and healthy for a conference is
Right.
to always be competitive and have a good mix of teams.
yeah, you don't want to have Scott County Central in your conference.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like,
And the way, let's be honest, the way that Trenton started out, there's probably schools that were like, why did we let them in? The girls haven't lost a conference game in 3 years in softball or basketball. What's going on? We can't even, crack the egg on this. But, all of us that knew the cycles, and like you talked about, it was going to eventually taper off. And we were, Trenton would come back to the mean in sports, and they did. That makes for a healthier conference. Yeah.
yeah, it's still going strong. Now, this is a legacy show. So I kind of warned you that we would dig into the past, and I've got a bunch of stuff here, and I know you've got stuff. And so we'll do it this way. I'll give you kind of a shot at in these categories that I'm coming up with. I'll share that. You might say, okay, there's a comparable team today kind of rewriting history in that same way, or something that you've seen in the last 10 years. I was going to GRC games back in the early 70s. Yeah. So it's just institutional memory in my head. Spill some history about how this thing got started in 1929.
Well, there was really a desire to schedule teams that were close to you. Back then, you had dirt roads. To travel somewhere took a long time. And so they wanted to have some schools that are close to each other. So 6 schools got together, and mainly to help schedule football and basketball games at the time. They were Bethany, Maysville, Albany, Grant City, King City, and why am I forgetting the other one right now? Sandberry. So it was those 6 schools that got together and to form a conference. And it originally was not called the Grand River Conference. It was called the Grand River Six. And so they would do that. It has gone through a lot of changes over time. Maysville got kicked out for a few years because they didn't have a football team that they wanted to put on varsity. They had a bunch of young players, and so they got kicked out. They brought them back in a couple years. Conception College kind of took their place for a couple years, and then Conception College said, well, this is too long of travel for us. So they dropped back out, and they don't exist as a school anymore. And then you started having other schools join. Some joined and left, but it really was something, the desire to schedule games every year and have those constant opponents.
Now, at that time, I mean, it seems like such a bad time. There was a drought.
Right.
There were heat waves. There was cold.
Nobody had any money.
Mm-hmm.
Banks were closing. There were 2 banks that closed in the first year of the conference during that year. So I assume part of this was kind of sports could be a relief, a sense to get away from tough times while we're going through them.
Yeah, and that still happens today as well. Yeah, you mentioned the money. The first ticket prices were 25 cents for a student and 35 cents for adults. So probably a lot of more money then than it is now, but it's interesting that was the first ticket prices.
Now, I mentioned the $2 entry fee to join the Grand River Six. So they had a whopping $12 in the budget to start with. So I found this article And you may know this story, but the first football trophy, and they agreed that they would offer a trophy for the winning football team. But this was to be a half-sized football at the top of this trophy size. The coach of Bethany didn't like that idea. Chuck Graham was his name. And he decided that he thought his team deserved a bigger trophy. Okay. And he wanted a regular-sized football-sized trophy, because if it was half-size, that meant it was literally a fourth of the size of an actual football. So that would have looked weird at the top of a trophy. So the conference voted to buy this half-size trophy, and Graham had arranged that they would pay whatever they were going to pay for that trophy, and then he would pony up the rest so that his team could have a proper trophy.
And the most important part of that story is, was there really a coach back then called Chuck Graham?
Graham.
That is like the most 30s high school football coach name I've ever heard. Old Chuck Graham. He's a good one.
He didn't. So I thought that was great for a couple of reasons. One is the conference is never going to be rich and have all these riches, and the football coach is always going to want something bigger and better. I want to talk about what I'm calling the GOATs of the GRC.
Okay.
Greatest of all time, the GRC. So I've got some research, and we're talking GOATs. So every team's kind of had its era, its excellence. Mm-hmm. There's Gallatin golf, there's King City in track, there's Stanberry's basketball, there's Worth County 8-man football, Maysville softball. What are some of the ones that stand out to you when you think of the big boys on the block or on the porch over the history of the GRC? What are some of the schools and programs?
So you mentioned Worth County and 8-man football. That's definitely one. But interestingly, South Harrison and Bethany, they have been the ones that have won the most titles in almost every sport. There's a few that they haven't, and there's a few I'm missing a few of the years for the history. But they really, I would say, kind of the original one that I won't say dominated the conference, because it's not a domination, but they've been the most successful in that area. You've had some other ones, over time that have gone through this. You mentioned Gallatin Goth. Worth County had very successful girls track. Hamilton Penny is no longer in the conference, but they were very successful in multiple sports, including track and field and basketball. There's definitely been some over time. Hamilton football was very good, and probably one of the big reasons why they left the GRC and went to KCI. Cameron dominated in football while they were in it, and they left it because 1968, when the playoffs started and they had a point system, they felt that they were too big for these schools, and they weren't going to get the right number of points against the teams that were in their class. And so that's why they left it. There's been a lot of good schools, but as we said before, I don't think there's really been a dominant school in this conference, not even a dominant school in any sport. There's been spurts of it as well, but not really any domination.
Very interesting. I came up with a couple things on the coach's side, okay? And chip in with anything that you want. Now, I told him, and I purposely used this name, Billy Dean Snyder, who was an assistant football JV basketball coach at Gallatin in 1962 and 63, became Bill Snyder, Kansas State's famous football coach, who probably had the record as taking the worst, most woeful football program, turning them into a national powerhouse. Bill Snyder was a JV basketball coach at Gallatin in 1962. Mike Arbuckle, who we've had on the program, and who can walk around with a couple of World Series rings as part of the Philadelphia Phillies and the Royals management team, and as a scout is in the National Scouting Hall of Fame, started his career in King City. Herb Webster, who built the Penny programs, the girls program, from the ground up, and they were dominant and won a state championship in 1977. He's in the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame as the all-time winningest girls basketball coach. At the time, he was put into that in 2013, and he started at Jamesport, went to Penny, and then ended up at Kearney. And then there's one other one I came up with, and that's Danny Brown, who led Gallatin to 4 straight championships in the 80s, then went on to other jobs, and at West Platte won 2 state championships in 2001, 2005, and is in the Missouri Association of High School Coaches Hall of Fame. So there's some good coaches that have come through here. Anybody that stands out to either of you, somebody you coached against or saw?
Well, I'll throw a shout out to, when I started my career, I thought Rick Lynn from Gallatin was one of the best coaches and still one of the best coaches I ever saw. Coached both sports there for a long time, racked up hundreds and hundreds of wins, and I always thought that was, when I coached, the toughest game you were going to have was going to have to beat Gallatin in girls basketball. They had an incredible run in the 90s and the 2000s under him. So that one always comes to mind with me, that the legacy he left there at Gallatin and just how hard it was to win against his teams. So I'll go with Rick.
Yeah, I would say, and this is, of course, more modern era, the ones that I follow, Mark Cole and Chris Holt, both of them coached in the conference, coached even several schools within the conference. Been very successful coaches everywhere that they've been. Mark is now at Benton. I think Chris is retired. I don't know where he's at now.
He'll bounce back and show up somewhere, right?
But they've had track records of very successful teams during that time. There's been some very good coaches in all the sports within the GRC. Some that have been very successful, gone to multiple Final Fours. I think right now, Wade Bryson at North Andrew, he's had very successful teams. And even if it looks like early in the season he's not going to be good, he always has a team that's competing, and some that have gone to the Final Four as well, as a really good coach. But there are a lot of successful coaches in this conference. And, I think that on any given night, there's going to be some that may not have the best athletes, and may not have the best overall team, but the coaching has led them to very successful games.
I always thought when I watched Stanberry girls play, they just had a way that they played. They had a kind of that high post, low post offense, and the way they ran the system. And I was like, I always loved that kind of an offense, kind of a Bill Self system. And they always had people to plug in, knew what to do with their post players, knew what to do with their wings and their guards, and they were tough to beat. Let's talk about some of the non-basketball, non-football. We're basketball coaches and football fans, so we can talk about that a lot. But boys track, what Hamilton was able to do, they won 13 championships in 20 years during their time. And then lately, you've got Princeton, Milan, Putnam County all kind of stepping in at different times. So is there anybody at this point that's building that kind of a track reputation?
In track, it's kind of gone in spurts a little. Albany has been pretty successful lately. King City's had some very successful track teams. Pattonsburg got third in state the year before last. Had successful teams. Worth County's always been good. And Stanberry seems to be up and coming in that area as well on the girls' side. But I think there's been a lot more individual track athletes really that have the biggest thing I will say that for track in the GRC is girls pole vaulting. Girls pole vaulting has won every Class 1 state championship since 2018. And so there is right now a dynasty of girls pole vaulters in the GRC, mostly the GRC West, but in the GRC schools.
Must be some guru coach out there, special coach that works with all these girls from different places.
Yeah.
And not all from the same school, from different schools, right?
No, they're not all. You have Worth County in there. You have Princeton in there. Bramer, when they were in the conference at one time, had a pole vault winner. So it's been many different schools in there.
And you do find that, my daughter was involved in track and throwing, and you'll find that special coach, and it might be in St. Joe, it might be down in Liberty, it might be somewhere else. And then you'll see all the people from your conference showing up to learn the same stuff you're learning. So it makes for a competitive environment.
Yeah, I remember Albany was one of the first in the area, maybe in the GRC, to have an all-weather track. They put a track in before everybody started going to all-weather tracks. Albany had enough interest and enough support and success in their track program to put that in, and that was regarded in the area as a great place to go run because they had an all-weather track. Now there's many schools in the GRC that have that.
And that has a lot to do with athletes. If you have a place to go practice, you're not just doing it for that 6 or 8 weeks of the season.
Right.
Girls track, it just seems like, man, Hamilton was just a wipeout in the early part of the century. And I just happened to bump into our friend Jeremy Esri over at North Central Missouri College today, and he reminded me that his sister Jordan has 8 state titles, cross country and girls track, and then they had a 2008 state champion basketball team. So they just had a run in the early 2000s.
Yeah, cross country won 6 straight from 2004 to 2009, and then track and field on the girls' side. And then track and field won 5 straight from 2007 to 2011.
And we'd be remiss now to not talk about wrestling a little bit too, because the teams that the GRC East, or the current GRC, has put together in wrestling is unbelievable. Now that you have Brookfield, Gallatin, Marceline, Maysville, Polo, South Harrison, and Trenton all in the same conference, all dynamite wrestling schools that bring home multiple state medalists every year. And so they probably are the most feared small school wrestling conference, maybe in the state, because of the power of those schools and their wrestling programs.
Yeah, in Class 1 last year, you look at the GRC and GRC West combined, 7 state champions. 6 of those were from the GRC side. 7 state champions on the boys' side, 2 on the girls' side. And winning a state championship on the girls' side is much tougher because you only have 2 classes, and these girls are competing against girls from schools that are over 1,000 in the Class 1. I think when they go to 3 classes, which I think they're going to do within the next couple of years, you're going to even see more of an explosion of these athletes from the GRC. But as you said, Brookfield, dominant wrestling school. I've never been to a place where wrestling is treated like, some of these other basketball, football. It's just crazy. Going there and just seeing the fan support that they have, it was just amazing. Marceline has been really good. They won the conference last year in boys wrestling. And Gallatin and Trenton have had state champions. Maysville's had state champions. Almost every school. Polo has been very successful, and especially on the girls' side, won conference more than any other school since they started girls wrestling. And so you have a lot of every school in the GRC has had some success in wrestling, even just recently.
Let's roll over to girls softball. I mentioned Maysville, and they've been outstanding in 3 state championships over 8 or 9 year period there.
Right.
In boys golf, Gallatin had 6 state titles in 20 years, which was cool. It was 2 different sets of groups, 3 each. Bryce Garnett came out of that. By the way, Bryce finished like 31st in his opening Sony Hawaii Open last week. But you had Jet Simmons, who was an individual state champion, and Brody Bird in 2025. So golf, a big thing, and there's individuals that pop up in golf too.
Yeah, you have Abby Owens from South Harrison, who's been very successful, won 4 straight conference championships, and then finished in the top 5 in state all 4 years. She's graduating this year. But South Harrison has won a state championship in golf a couple years ago too, and so there's been a lot of success in pretty much all the sports as well.
Okay, now the next category I'm going to throw out here, and this is the one I picked out because this goes way back into my memory banks. I picked the greatest year in basketball. So you could pick any sport. We had a lot of success in football just in this past year. But in basketball, 1971 was the year I picked, when Stanberry won the state championship. Gallatin went to the quarterfinals, and King City and some other teams were really rugged, and every game was a battle. Stanberry went 26-5, won the state. Gallatin was 26-5, beat out by Cairo in the state quarterfinals. They had a lot of 6'3", 6'4" guys just strung throughout the conference. Pretty big size kids for 1971. And so I just happened to pick that out. Is there any other particular year that jumps out at you?
2015-16, and I'm going to throw football in there too, because Stanberry went unbeaten, won the state championship in football, then went unbeaten and won the state championship in basketball that year. It's the only school in the history of the state of Missouri that has done that, where they have been unbeaten in both football and basketball, win state championships. So probably heard the term the gauntlet. So doing that is just so rare that to me, that's one of the most successful seasons that has ever happened in this conference.
Unbelievable.
Okay, I know I'm biased, but I'm going to go the next year, the opening showdown or crossover games that were held at Trenton, and it was Stanberry boys and girls coming to Trenton to play Trenton boys and girls in the first ever crossover conference championship game, and both games were outstanding. The Stanberry girls were really good. Of course, the Trenton girls, that was their first run to the Final Four. The Stanberry boys were coming off an unreal season and were upset by the Trenton boys at the buzzer at a ball that went through the net as the horn went off. It was just a great night to open up the new conference, and so that's the one I'm going to go with.
I just remember when I was a kid, I would come up here and hop in a car with my grandparents and come to see Gallatin play whoever, and they were playing in King City's gym, or they were playing at Gilman City in the tournament. You had to get there 2 hours early just to get in the gym. And just the passion that people felt about sports up here, particularly winter sports, wrestling and with basketball. It just seemed like it was a little different from the suburban areas or the small towns that I was used to down around the KCI footprint. It just seemed like people were pretty passionate. I mean, it was a big thing.
Right.
You live in a small town and you got a great team. Everybody's in the gym.
Yeah, Putnam County, when they brought their football team to St. Joe, it looked like the entire town of Unionville, or probably more than that, were at the game. So you see this. There's a lot of passion for these schools in the conference.
Outstanding. Now, let's talk about some football GOATs. There have been some great players come out, individual players who went on to do other things, and they were great while they were in high school as well. You've got the Madison brothers, Brad, Ryan Madison from Bethany. You've got Tyler Llewellyn. Those guys went on to be 3-year starters for the Missouri Tigers and accomplished a lot of things. Kellen Overstreet, even though he was only in the conference in his first 2 years, he was all-state freshman, sophomore years at Penny High School and went on to play at the University of Wyoming. But I'm going to take my greatest all-around athlete and football player from the GRC, and I'm going to say that's got to be Roger Worley from King City. Roger Worley, and he's kind of a mythical name. It's a long way back. I was fortunate enough to remember seeing him play at University of Missouri and watching him on the Cardinals games, because back in the old days, you got 2 games. You got the Chiefs, whatever slot they were in. You got the Cardinals, whatever slot they were in. Listen to these numbers. He was all-state in basketball, 19 points, 11 rebounds. So double-double average every night. Year before, he'd scored over 20 points a game. There was also a pretty good guy there that played there called Stan Petty alongside him, who was an outstanding player. So
Before you go on, I met Stan in Lawson in December, so pretty neat meeting him there.
He came to the Trenton game the other night. So they had these 2 guys. He was a state champion. Roger was a state champion in 3 track events: high, low hurdles, and long jump, or the broad jump, as it was called back in the day, and led his team to a Class S state title in track as a senior. And then he was all-state in football and scored 16 touchdowns. Oh, by the way, he went on to the University of Missouri, made it into the College Football Hall of Fame, and was an All-American at Missouri. And then he played at the St. Louis Cardinals. He was 6-time All-Pro and is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That's pretty good resume all the way through. In high school, he was a dominant all-around athlete. So that's my nominee. But there's some other people out there. I'm sure you're thinking of another name.
You're thinking of football?
In any sport.
In any sport.
Somebody that really stands out. Or was an all-around athlete, was great.
As I said, I've been covering it lately. The one that I would throw out there since I've been covering is Katie Pauley at Milan. She scored over 3,000 points in her career there. She had numerous times where she would just cross half court and hit a jump shot. And it was like once she was across half court, she was in shooting range. If you didn't pick her up, she would hit 3-pointers from there. But the most amazing one is when her and Brooke Littrell both scored 59 points in the same game against each other. And so that really kind of put her on the map. Brooke was already kind of known. Brooke was, I can't remember if she was a junior or senior that year, and it was Katie's freshman year.
Green City, right?
Green City, yes. And so Katie was, she was an amazing player and didn't really look like an athlete, but you got her on the floor and she could just do anything. My most memorable basket from her is this was in the conference championship game. St. Joe Christian was playing Milan. I was actually on the bench keeping score for St. Joe Christian at the time. And at halftime, St. Joe Christian was leading. St. Joe Christian had beaten them the week before, and they were leading. And really, Milan was not playing well. And St. Joe Christian missed a free throw. Katie Pauley just grabs a rebound, lofts it about 70 feet, and swishes it. And the momentum took them into the second half, and they ended up winning the conference championship. But I've seen her have some amazing shots. I've seen her score 48 points in a game too. She was just an amazing athlete.
She's still playing. She's in her senior season down at Missouri State,
right,
and has had a couple big games recently.
And I'll throw a couple others out that I would say both had good careers in basketball. And basketball is my favorite sport, so I'm probably leaning towards that one. But 2 games that I went to, one was Tanner McDaniel. He just started hitting threes and was not missing, and ended up hitting 9 threes in a game, and was one of the most amazing shooting performers I've seen outside of Tony Osborne. But Tony Osborne is not a GRC athlete. So the other one, in addition to that, was last year, Adeline Hinkey for Princeton was playing Green City in the district championship game. Addie had 1 point at halftime, and the rest of the players kept them in the game. I think they were only down a couple points at halftime. She goes and just starts hitting shots. She scored all her points in the third quarter, ended up scoring most of the points in the fourth quarter, ended up with 30 points in the game after having 1 at halftime, and led the team to a victory in the district championship game in a really one of the loudest environments I ever heard in a game. But those are 2 more recent ones that I would think of since I've been following.
So what's the story of the GRC? So we kind of wind it down here. I mean, what still gets you excited about it? What's your favorite part of engaging with this? Seeing young athletes?
There's several things. One is I love all the teams in the conference. I mean, people will accuse me of having a favorite, but I love every team. I root for every team. I get excited when they're playing a non-conference team and they're winning. Last year when I went to Gallatin and Gallatin-Lincoln game in the quarterfinals, I was as disappointed as the Gallatin fans if they didn't win. Just anytime I have an opportunity to get in there and just cover a game, I get excited about the response that I have, especially on Facebook page and how people respond to it. You know, I do a weekly poll for Player of the Week every week, and that gets a lot of good response from it. I get excited when it gets towards the end of the season and I can start naming my my athletes of the year and just anticipation. I know who's going to get, but the fans don't yet, and just anticipation of these. And for some of these, you know, I've gotten to be friends with some of the parents of the athletes during the time, and so some of those relationships are really powerful too and help. So there's not really that much I don't like about it. I'm always excited for basketball season. Although once basketball season's over, it's a little bit of a relief because basketball is the longest season and it's one I probably go to the most games as well. There's really not a lot that I don't really enjoy about this conference, and it's something that I plan to do when I retire from my paying job.
So one question I ask a lot of our guests, and this is a perfect question for you. So I like to travel around and go into gyms. So favorite GRC gym, current or in the past, that you like to go watch a game at?
Milan's a really nice gym. I enjoy there. Lighting is very good. I'm thinking this from a photography standpoint too.
Right.
Milan is probably one of my favorites to go to. Now, with that being said, St. Joe Christian is opening a new gym.
I've noticed that. I was going to ask you that too. Yeah.
In February. So I've been in there before they put the bleachers in there. So I'm really excited about going into that gym, and they're hosting districts this year too. So that's one of the things I'm excited about. But there's a lot of good gyms in the conference, but I'd probably put Milan as number one in the conference right now. So anybody else who's listening to this, I know you have great gyms too. But,
you don't want to make any enemies, just friends.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, we greatly appreciate what you do. I mean, it informs people. I saw something on your drill down because I'm kind of a stat geek, right? But I noticed that Putnam County and Brookfield have played 2 games this year.
Right.
And you know what I'm going to say.
Yes.
The first game, Brookfield smoked Putnam County. Likely Putnam County had very few players available to them. They were making a run into the state playoffs, or they had just gotten started or whatever. And literally it was a wipeout game. Just this last week, they played again. And this time, Putnam County won by more points. So the spread, it was like 33 in the first game, 35 in the second game that Putnam County won by. So the spread of the 2 games was 68 points. And yet, in the drill down, if you did the average score for those games, average score of those 2 games, 56-55, Putnam County.
Stats can be misleading. You got to be careful, right?
So I'll give you some background on that. You're absolutely right. Putnam County played in the Tri-Rivers Classic the same week that their football team went to state. And actually, that game was the day before Putnam County traveled to St. Joe to play. So they had 6 players, I believe, in that game. And so obviously Brookfield was dominant. So when Brookfield played Putnam County last week, Phoenix Jordan, who is the leading scorer in the conference right now, boys and girls, he has over 20 right now. He was not in the game. So Brookfield was missing their best player the second time around. So they play again. they play again on Thursday night this week.
Thursday night.
This will be the third one. So Phoenix Jordan is back, and I would expect that it would probably be a closer game. Putnam is probably playing better right now, but Brookfield, I think they still are capable of coming up and beating them. But it is definitely an interesting stat. Yeah, I noticed the same thing too. That the scores were over 30 points in each favor of each one of the games. So we'll see what happens this week. I'm not expecting a 30-point game this week.
Okay, for our listeners out there, as we're wrapping things up, the current Grand River Conference schools are Brookfield, Gallatin, Marceline, Maysville, Milan, Polo, Putnam County, South Harrison, and Trenton. And the current Grand River Conference West schools are Albany, King City, North Andrew, North Harrison, Pattonsburg, Princeton, St. Joe Christian, Stanberry, and Worth County. And I'm getting this list courtesy of grandriverconference.com. So if you want to know all of your Grand River Conference GRC information, that's where you want to go, grandriverconference.com, and also Grand River Conference on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We appreciate what you're doing. We love getting into the weeds on these kind of things. And people take this stuff very seriously, and we do too. We love to see young athletes get opportunities to win conference championships, to have that moment in the sun. And you're out there looking at all of it, taking it all in, and then putting it back out in content for people. And it's greatly appreciated. And I hope you do keep doing this even when you retire, because obviously you're not doing it for the money.
No.
And we have that same principle.
For love of the game.
For love of the game. And I just want to thank Jeremy Benson for being our guest today and giving us the lowdown on one of the oldest conferences in Missouri. It's still existing and going strong, and just has a lot of great schools that make it up and a lot of passionate fans. What do you think, Chris?
I'm ready to go watch a basketball game now.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. I want to thank our listeners at Show Me Sports Legacies.